Hello, everyone. Everyone in California, rather, all the employees and also employers for whom I hope that this video will be useful during these challenging times. Today, I would like to talk about one of the most common questions I've been asked since the virus and since all the restrictions have started, and that's the issue of layoffs. So, I'm going to make this video quick and to the point, and then if there are any questions from the viewers, from you guys, I will also do my best to answer them. First of all, what is the difference? What is a layoff and what is the termination? What is the difference between the two? Well, termination is when you, as an employee, are being separated from your employment due to alleged misconduct or due to alleged violation of policy or due to something else that you allegedly done, at least from the employer's perspective. In other words, it's a separation due to your fault, due to something that you have done. On the other hand, a layoff occurs when your separation is not due to your fault. This could be due to a reduction in force at a company that you work, due to restructuring, due to moving employees around, or otherwise for some reason that has nothing to do with you. In other words, the employer is not accusing you of anything. They're not saying that they're terminating you because of something that you have done. Now, the question is whether layoffs are legal. Generally, a layoff is of course legal, especially in an at-will employment situation where an employer can terminate an employee for any reason or no reason, with or without notice, with certain limited exceptions, unless there is evidence that the true reason for the termination is illegal, such as discrimination or retaliation. So if we're taking this time right now, the time when we're dealing with virus and so many companies are unable to keep payroll, they're unable to stay in business, and they're forced to lay their workers off, then obviously this type of layoff is going to be legal. There's nothing illegal about a layoff due to a company's financial hardship, unless again more is going on, unless there is more than meets the eye. So this brings me to my next point. What is the right way to leave when you're being laid off? And this is probably the most important part of this video. Many workers today, out of frustration, out of anxiety, out of stress, and out of anger, when they're informed of their layoff because of the coronavirus, they react emotionally, they react with anger, they start a conflict with their employer, which pretty much eliminates any chances of these workers coming back to work when things get better, when that business picks up, and when the company would like to rehire the employees that they lost. As a worker, you have to understand that the first thing the companies will want as soon as they're able to, as soon as the restrictions are lifted, is to bring their workers back as soon as possible. So if you leave, if you part on good terms, if you leave in a way that does not leave a bitter taste in your employer's mouth about your departure, or in their mind rather, then you're very likely to come back, assuming that you're a good worker. And especially if you're a good worker, especially if you worked for that employer for many years and you've done a lot of good things, it would be a pity if you ruined all that by leaving on bad terms. Because remember, people are remembered and people are judged in every aspect of life, including at work. People are judged on how they leave, on those last few days that they work, maybe on the last interaction that they had with their manager. So there's no reason to create a conflict. If your employer says, we're sorry, we have to lay you off, we hope that it's temporary, and here's a little bit of money for you, maybe more, maybe less, maybe none, whatever it is, your response should be, I'm sorry that we're all experiencing these difficult time. I'm hoping that this will be over soon. Please contact me as soon as you think I'm able to come back. if you don't close the business altogether. You can also offer, um, you can offer to do certain things for them while you're laid off. Maybe you can offer to work fewer hours. Maybe you can offer to work part-time or very part-time from home. Maybe you can even help them with by agreeing to accept deferred compensation. This might or might not be legal. In some cases it is, in some cases it isn't. But the more steps you take, the more effort you make to preserve a good relationship with your employer, of course, the more likely they will want you to come back as soon as possible and as soon as the business restarts. And this message goes to employers as well. If you have to lay someone off, do it respectfully, do it nicely, because you will need these people when things pick up, and you need someone to push your business forward. Now, the question is how to prove that the layoff is illegal. So, in some cases, just like when there is no virus, and it's similar when there is virus, in some cases, employers use a layoff as an excuse for terminating someone for unlawful reason. Maybe that employee is older and they're thinking, this is an opportunity to terminate that employee by laying them off and replacing them with someone younger. Maybe it's a woman that the employer wants to replace with a man. Maybe it's a pregnant employee or a disabled employee that the employer doesn't want to bother to accommodate or provide the rights that they're entitled to. How do you prove that the layoff is just an excuse for this type of discriminatory termination? There are different types of evidence that might or might not exist. It really depends on each and every specific situation. Your attorney should be able to evaluate your layoff and determine whether there is sufficient evidence to make a claim. These things are not often black and white. So some evidence might suggest that the layoff is discriminatory. Some other evidence might suggest that it's not. But again, an experienced attorney should be able to determine whether this is something that's legally worth pursuing. However, some of the early and more obvious signs that the layoff might not be legal, that it might be an excuse for discrimination, is if you're the only person who is being laid off and you're not the most junior and you're not the worst performing, and then you find out that somebody else was hired shortly after you were terminated, and that replacement creates a presumption of discrimination. Let's say you're black and you've been replaced with someone white. You're older, you've been replaced with someone younger. You're disabled, who've been replaced with someone who is not disabled, and so forth. So these are early signs that would suggest that it might be worth looking further. It might be worth investigating that layoff further to determine whether there's a basis for a legal claim. And that doesn't mean that you have to run to court and file a case. It could mean that you might have a certain leverage to negotiate a severance for yourself. But it also might mean that you may have a case for wrongful termination, and you may be entitled to compensation as a result under the law. Now, lastly, going back to the right way to leave. Even if you believe that you are being laid off for discriminatory or retaliatory reasons, still, you're better off leaving on good terms and not saying and not writing anything mean, nasty, and rude to your employer. And here is why. If you do write or say something mean and nasty and rude, then later the employer is going to use those statements against you to make you look like a bad guy, like an ungrateful guy, like an angry or a dangerous person, and that never helps your case. The fact that you get in your employer's face is not gonna help you get a bigger severance, and it's certainly not gonna help you do better in court, because an angry employer is not gonna be inclined to grant you a more generous severance. And an employer who puts up your mean statements on an overhead in court when you go and you have a trial of your termination, those statements are not going to impress the judge and the jury if it goes that far. They're not going to impress them as suggesting something positive about you, something that says, wow, this is a good person, was a good worker, he deserves all the compensation that he's asking for. So, in other words, there's no benefit in being mean, rude, and nasty to your employer when you're being laid off, regardless of whether it's a genuine layoff or whether it's clearly a discriminatory or retaliatory termination. Having a conflict right then and there is not going to help. It can only hurt. So save your energy and save your enthusiasm for later. Thank you for watching, and please be safe and be well.